So we're going to be doing it with the same mix and all that. I don't know what that was. Jeez. I could hear my voice through my phone. Okay, so yeah, if you haven't got the guide, roll to Discord and grab it. So it's just kind of like the things that you need to kind of like know for reference when talking about this stuff, or just like, talking to people when working in a mixing environment. It's kind of easier to be kind of specific, especially if you're going to be working with like an engineer or whatever. Some point in the future, I'm sure won't be forever, where people will be back into studios again. Um, so, this is kind of a good thing. A lot of this terminology too is kind of from Pro Tools as well, like snapshot automation. This is a general term, and I kind of say it at one point in the guide here. But yeah, it's a general term to kind of refer to a set of different parameter positions at a different point in the track. So this is kind of a general term. So when I say snapshot automation, you were to look it up and found a bunch of stuff about Pro Tools and see the mixing board guides and all that shit, because that's how you would do it if you were working with a console. And you would have to like set it up so, the EQ and compression changes for certain parts if you're trying to like get like a live performance or something like that, or also mix it while running it from tape. So that becomes like a huge thing. So if you're mixing from tape, like you recorded everything onto tape and now you're like multi-track running it into a board to mix it, now you have to work with, no DAW. But with Pro Tools, you can definitely like sync all that shit up. Logic is also set up to do a lot of that stuff as well. Then there's Nuendo. I don't know if anybody knows that one. It's like Cubase's, step uncle. That's rich. Because like the company Steinberg, I believe, like acquired Nuendo and used it as a basis to make Cubase. Because it's like one of like the best, um, I don't know, just like post production DAWs out there, and it's like $2,000 for like the new, full version of it. So it's like kind of worth its price. But Ableton's also $1,200, so it's hard to argue with price on that. But yeah, the Window's super tight. It's kind of like Logic, where you can do everything linear phase, and it's all built into the tracks. And then you can do a lot of this kind of stuff as well, where you can do like Nuendo, you can like map out trigger points for live recordings and stuff, and then have that sent to different samplers and shit. And it's been doing that, you know, well, since I was a teenager, so at least 10 years plus, and everything else had to catch up via a plugin that allowed it to do that. Whereas like Nuendo was doing that, plus like also having a SMPTE time sync, which is kind of big if you're trying to do anything like with film, like at all. And you're doing sound design for film. Things have to be sunk to frames in order for them to be just, dropped into whoever's like, making the movie or whatever you're doing, for them just to drop it in there and it works. Whereas like if it wasn't sunk to frames, you would like bounce it out from your project, and then somebody would sync it in and be like, hey, these things are like off by like, a little bit every single time. And that kind of like affects everything. But yeah, so that is also part of like the editing process as well, making sure things are in time. If you're doing like post-production stuff with like hit points, everything needs to be like perfect. When I worked on this like Chinese game where I had to do a bunch of like cutscenes that were from the game, but they were the animation of the characters like doing an action or some type of like spell. And so what I had to do in order to like send them the perfect assets was have them take a short movie of each of the different like things I need to make sound for. And having it sunk to frames just allows me to like make a 6 second sample that's like sunk to that frame rate of whatever they were trying to do. I think they're using Coco 3D or something. I think that's the name of the software or middleware they're using in order to make their game. Anybody knows what that is? It's a different like kind of like Unity and on the Unreal Engine. And those are pretty cool for making lots of shit. But I mean that's way down the line if you're trying to get into that shit from now. Um, but just knowing how to like sync stuff up in time and like make sure everything's edited perfectly before you try to like um I guess finish your thing, then it becomes a huge workflow thing where you can just make sure that for me like applying that to mixing, it's like cleaning up all the noise, cleaning up everything that shouldn't be there so I can have like all my loudest parts like super loud. But it's the same like part of my workflow that I would do to make sure everything is in sync when doing like something for post. So it's like you have to have like certain moments where you're just producing, doing your thing, and then you have like, the next layer of paint, because you can't just lay paint onto like a canvas. You have to like prime it first. If you really want to make something cool, I mean, you can, but priming it like always makes for like a better end result because you're painting on paint or whatever for that analogy, I guess. If you ever watched anything Bob Ross, but he like makes that a thing, and that's like the first 5 minutes. He's just talking about the different primer he put on, and he's just like, "All right, so we did a clear coat on top of this, and so watch this, just doing this," and he just like dabs a piece of paint and it like turns into a bunch of different colors because of the primer, and then he paints something on top of that. Um, that's kind of the same thing with mixing where you're like, you have your basic, pieces ready to go and you want to go and like then fortify everything down. So the end result is, just that much better. Because, like I've definitely written tracks and just have bounced them straight out of Ableton. I've even used, bounce to SoundCloud. I'm not crazy. Um, like for real. But if I really want to like take my time with it, you know, this is like the process I do. And for the most part, I do that like on anything that would be considered like an album track besides like my mixtapes. And I say like mixtapes because those are just really quick tracks that I'm just trying to like, get off my chest or whatever and put them out into the world. They don't always need to be, overproduced or whatever. So, I mean, just take that into consideration when you're like thinking about your own music so you can like, you know, give yourself a break certain points and then, put in like 150%, which is like making it as good as it can be by just running it through the process. It's not even about, oh dude, it doesn't even like give me anything extra. Like my shit already sounded better without it. It's like it's not about that. It's about just running it through the process and then just seeing how it sounds after that, as opposed to, you know, being bogged down by the process itself and, trying to just skip to the finish line all the time. Um, because like there's a different way of pushing out music that has become like super common over the last like, I guess 5-10 years, where it's just, every month or so people need to be putting out stuff. Whereas like you could wait a year between an album from whoever you're listening to, and it was like completely on time, because they had time to make the music as good as it could be, sell it to the people, and then tour it, for a year straight. and then move on to something different. Whereas now it's about what's next month, pretty much. And then there is, well, I mean, right now there's no like touring or doing anything like that, but even before that, it's always it's becoming more recyclable, where you know, just a different way of like thinking about finishing your shit. Where this is like more of the way I've learned from like different kind of college places I've been to like learn about mixing and be an actual audio engineer. So, these are more standardized versions of just mixing as opposed to, putting OTT on everything and turning everything up and slamming into a Pro L, which is fun. But, you know, at the end of the day, you need to like fix everything before you do that. And, I've just found out the hard way of doing it wrong for so long, where when I did sit down finally, because, I definitely can be impatient with like putting out shit or just finishing tracks. So, when I did start to take the time to do this, all this, shit, like definitely got way better, and it got easier as time went on. I didn't really think about it as much and just kind of did things. Whereas like inside this track here, pretty much everything I've talked about and even just kind of mentioned here, I'm already doing, even during the production process to like kind of move it along a little bit quicker and give me kind of a view of what the end result would be. Am I putting my album on vinyl? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, of course, Scully 2 Baked. Love your name. Uh, okay, so, beyond the life lecture, I guess, we always kind of start on that. We're going to be talking a lot about EQ and more about compression. Not, um, from the ground up compression like we did before. We're going to talk more like applied stuff now. And kind of like jump into spectral, like imaging stuff and all that. Because like with EDM music, it's pretty common that you're running most everything mono. So, I've like, even just like checking out articles kind of earlier, I think I was looking at mid-side stuff, and the first article that popped up was Icon Collective, and it was just it was about like using it a lot, and then the next one right after it was like an Isotope, 8 mistakes of using the mid-side techniques, and I'm just like, wow, that's hilarious, because it's literally like how to misuse it, and then how you've misused it right in the Google search, like right alongside of it. Because like mid-side EQ is like something you don't need on everything. There's a lot of applications in, EDM music to use it 100% because we're dealing with mono shit. But, just understanding what mid-side EQ is, and let's actually skip to that over here, just kind of like kind of open on that. First point, not understanding what it actually is. Second point, improperly using it. And it's like all the reasons why. And then third point, not making use of a simple EQ in mid-side mode and then like going way over the top with it. Because you need to like put all of your buses through it and just like, oh, I widen out all my highs like this and I sidechain them like this, and then I run my top kick through this and blah blah blah. It's like I've seen people do that, and I'm just like, they're actually coming to me wondering why their shit's not getting as loud. And I'm like, I'm talking about like a real moment where somebody has actually asked me for advice on the mix, and I've seen that shit, and I'm just like, all right, so these are cool, but what if we just take off all of these crazy mid-side buses and just run it to your master and see how it sounds there? And then we just did that, and it was just like, oh, okay, there's the literal mid-range. because it all gets phased out and ends up getting like super squeezed, and you don't really like know where all the transients are. That everything gets blurred. So mid-side EQ is like something you should definitely look into, um, you know, a lot more. So we're gonna talk about kind of that stuff as well. EQ weight gain. Yeah, EQ8 is actually super cool for having the mid-side modes. ProQ is even cooler for having mid-side per band and then also having dynamic EQs. So whenever I'm going to do something that's like crazy mid-side, I also want it to be, super phase accurate, because that's something that becomes a huge problem. Because like, even just to start out, let's talk about what mid-side EQ is and what mid-side is. Mid-side is not just, even just saying what this is, beyond that, this is not just a like way of making an EQ. This is actually a miking technique. So the miking technique that was being used for this was when things used to be mono. And, going into the stereo world, where they're trying to do like, two mic techniques in order to like capture the room or something. And what they would do is they would have like two mics, one angled to the side and one right up to the middle. And so you're miking up like your first reflections and then your direct reflection, and then combine them back together. And then you have to like kind of flip the phase in order to get them to work. So it's exactly that. But using that in order to create a faux stereo field. So you're trying to create like this point right in the center where, say, like the mids in this side profile phase out. So you're hearing this mono, really dry mid sound. And then say the side sound has a bunch of reflections, but they're higher frequencies. So you don't really get the higher frequencies of the up the middle sound, but you get more of the higher frequencies from the side. And then you can kind of like balance the phase between those two signals in order to get the best, what they're even saying here is sum difference, the best sum difference between the phase offset of those two sounds. Because the same source summing into one destination will cancel itself out. So you have to like find something that's just different enough, but has enough similarity to actually phase itself out, but not all of it. So you're trying to, get the same image, but from a different angle. That's why it's a miking technique, because you're using it mostly to mic up solo acoustic guitarists. That's one of the best ways to do it. Also, one of the best ways to do like a drum room or a like orchestral hall. Like I've done mid-side stuff for like miking up like live plays and shit, because it just gets like a better center image. And then I can actually mic up the sides, do all the other stuff. So that's what's used in addition to, it's not the only thing. So what a lot of the information or people who kind of like push it on, and then if you like look into like a pro engineer, most of them just talk shit about it. Like that's kind of something they laugh about, because it's like, it is something that's just, it was hype when it came out in terms of processing. So everybody was kind of overusing it. And then, using it on a master is like could be really great move or extremely bad. So like, it's kind of, you have to choose your battle with it. Using mid-side compression on like some type of bus setup with your master could kind of work. And they even kind of say that. I think at one point here where you could like sidechain the sides so they like hit with the kick a little bit harder and then they move. But you're also working with kind of a mono image as well. And then also separating everything so you're like getting most of your kick, if not all of it, in the center channel or the mid. And kind of phasing it out and not trying to get too much of the body, so it all the body exists in the middle and all the click and high end exists in the sides. Does the kilohertz car VQ have mid side? I believe it does. I think it's a button. Not sure. I have to double check on that. I think they have a mid side button on a couple other things though. But yeah, most of the new isotope stuff has like mid side compression as well. So this is where I think they're talking about that trick. Yeah, except they're actually talking about expansion, and then they're using it to like sidechain. So that's pretty cool. Get the pumping effects. Super good for like trance or whatever else. You can even use it on like hip hop and like other shit. I don't know about dubstep. I don't think you want that. Maybe drum and bass. But yeah, so if you haven't got the guide, definitely grab this so you can like just have this shit for reference. Just a bunch of different articles that I've kind of like sifted through that were kind of like the best stuff. And I included one in here about how to use a compressor from Hyperbits. So this one's actually good, you know, because it's geared more towards EDM. But yeah, it's kind of self-promoting, so just beware of that. But for the most part, everything is kind of like, you know, on point with what it's talking about. So this is a good reference point for like, you know, setting up like compression, you know, on different pieces of your mix and, you know, when to use different stuff like master bus compression. I mean, this is like kind of like the general stuff that you definitely want to keep in mind as a possible, you know, avenue to go down. Not like the end all, always do this on everything. You know, because like when some people find out about great stuff and it sounds great, they're like, all right, parallel compress everything, you know? And then that's just not true. You just don't want to do that. Or, you know, your first instinct to put OTT on everything to fix every problem ever with your mix. You know, just stop. Get help. But yeah, so also I included a couple links to these really, really cool like documents about loudness and about using compression in mastering. And these are a little bit more it just loads up my Twitter. Yeah, so this is like pretty good. But yeah, college level reading. So what impact it has had on the loudness wars. Back in 1893, things were at neg 50. But now. So like this is good. I really like this this whole thing. I've read through it. But also this other one. This is a hyper compression in music article. Not sure if these were people's college projects or they just really, really enthusiastic about this stuff, but it's good info. So this one is really great because it also references Bob Katz a few times, and I've like recommended everybody get that book, The Art of Mastering. I think that's what it's called. Bob Katz with the it's with a K and a Z. That's coolest last name ever. But like, yeah, this is a really, really general information about, you know, how to perceive loudness. And I've mentioned in the past, like, why I recommend that book is when I like got it when I was like, you know, 6 to 8 years ago. I was trying to figure out about mastering, and a lot of people were really telling me a lot of stuff. I had come in contact with a bunch of different mastering engineers in San Francisco, And, they kind of pointed me, just to read more books and like kind of understand stuff. Because mastering is not something that you can teach without experience, because it's the final polish. You're doing a bunch of different things as well at different levels with mastering, like meta tagging. That's part of mastering, where you're actually imprinting, you know, um, Trojan viruses into people's music to infect people. Just kidding. But like, the information for each track to go into iTunes that creates album artwork, everything like that, all gets infused into each track's data. I'm sure they can do that other thing too, but you're not going to learn that in mastering school. But yeah, perceived loudness here is something you should definitely look into, because when I started reading, about perceived loudness as it pertains to like our perception of mid range and how that affects the way we hear things, you know, just in a stereo environment. Like, so perceived loudness could mean, how far or away is somebody from me? So if somebody's far away and say behind a wall, then you don't hear any high end at all, because it all gets, filtered out. You only hear low end, which will be all muffled, you know. But say if they were just far away, and they weren't behind a surface, you'd be able to hear both low and high end, but from a distance with like reverb and some delay. But the biggest thing that gets lost between you and the sound source is mid range, because the low and high end are the things that have the most exaggerated power. So when we perceive really, really balanced and loud mid range, we perceive something close to us. So the more defined our mid range is and balanced flat, the better our master is going to sound, because the actual limiter is going to respond to low end being too loud, which would mean, you mixed into your limiter, because your low end wasn't coming through enough. And to fix that, you ended up turning it up. And then you're just still running to the same problem. Nothing even changes. And you're just like, you know what? Pro L sucks, dude. That's what happens at the end of the day. You're just like turning that sub louder up into that Pro L, and you're just like, you just hit Twitter immediately. You just got to be like, you know what, dude? Fucking Pro L can suck it. I fucking took it off today, dude. And then I put on a glue clamp and it was done. So don't waste your money, y'all. At's Fab Filter. Just like, yeah, let's check out your mix, dude. Hey, don't worry about it, dude. So like, this is pretty much what happens with our perceived loudness. So if like you want to have like equal power, between your low and your high end, you kind of have to create this kind of curve. So it's not going to be completely flat. You want it to pretty much angle downwards. Doesn't have to look like this, but this is where we're the most sensitive. So this is, the baby crying range. So from the distance, everything's going to kind of like change in our perception of like the balance of the frequency. So what this also means is we actually need this much power to actually hear the low end from like a huge distance. Yeah, hence like our perception of any like sawtooth through a big reverb is like, whoa, that's a doom horn from fucking some space movie with Tom Cruise, dude. All right, so yeah, that's just some stuff to think about beyond my rantings. But yeah, like I really, I think that's probably the best stuff you can just start to research into and then just soak up more knowledge about that. Um, yeah, because most of the stuff we're going to be talking about, like in a second here, is going to be kind of like geared around that. It's going to be kind of changing my, like, I guess, decisions on stuff because I'm like, all right, I want to do this for this section. You know, this is too loud here, and I want to like open it up for other things to pop through the mix, and then create more depth at certain spots. And like, yeah, so perceived loudness, definitely check that shit out. Um, yeah, but yeah, the other good article in here is the first one in here. It's the mid-range stuff. So this is exactly what I was just talking about. So perceived loudness, we perceive things closer, mid-range. So this is one of the better like kind of sources for this. Um, but yeah, so there's a little chart here where this is the frequency range, and this is what it's saying, you know, to your ear pretty much. If it's too loud at these different sections. So, you know, around 500 to 1,000, that would sound a little bit nasally or horn-like, honky. And then too much low end, muddy, boxy, congested. So those are actually defining different sections of 300 and below too. So muddy would represent too much sub range, whereas boxy would be like too much 150, 200 range. So there's different spots that you kind of have to like keep balanced in order to like make everything pop through. I'm pretty sure we talked about that in the last class as well, where I kind of like EQ'd some stuff out of the kick and just moved stuff out of the way. And depending on what you're trying to do with the processing, moving stuff out of the way that is too much of one of these things will change how you process it after that point. So if there's too much low end that's over triggering your compressor, then you might want to EQ it before your compressor and get a better transient to actually shape. So you're not trying to polish it turd, you know, fix it up before it goes into the process. You know, and that's one of the arguments to use EQ before compression, is to make sure that it's balanced before you want to control the dynamic range of it. Because that's pretty much what dynamic range is centered on. You know, is the transient defined enough, you know, to allow us to perceive like, wow, that was really loud and everything over there was really quiet, you know, so you can actually have a lot of call and response between the dynamic range of different spots. Like if you're doing anything in post-production as well, like say like mixing a movie, dynamic range is huge, and it literally will ruin the movie if you mess that up. Say like that one movie with Matthew McConaughey where he goes into space. Can't remember the name of that movie. Does anybody in chat know? Well, anyways, they were up for a ton of rewards, for that movie. They ended up losing a lot of them because of the director pretty much overproducing it, and he sat behind the mixing engineer. And this is something like they actually made a press release and said this shit. He sat behind the mixing engineer because I think he was apologizing. That's why it was being said. And told him to turn his shit up. And there was like one big scene that was so blaringly bad with how the dynamic range was, that it kind of took them off the running for a lot of shit, just that one scene. And that's how it like kind of goes. And I'm pretty sure it was like while the shuttle was like taking off, and they were having a conversation in the shuttle. And then they decided to make the shuttle engine roar louder than the conversation, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Because say if they were in a helmet and they were talking to each other inside the shuttle, you would be hearing it via radio voice over the roar if you want to give it like an actual effect. Or say like put some subtitles there or whatever, but it wasn't that. And so you end up like kind of try to listen through it. I don't know. But yeah, so like that's one of those things that just takes it out of everything. Or say like Call of Duty, you know, the background ambience. The dynamic range in that is so terrible that you can barely distinguish the footsteps from just general ambience. So yeah, Chris Nolan, armchairing. So yeah, that becomes kind of a thing. So like say in a EDM perspective or situation, having that, you know, no dynamic range in your intro can be just too much like ear fatigue for anybody trying to listen to it more than one time. So if I'm going to make my drops super loud, I usually like to give breaks along the way. And after mastering, it still kind of ends up looking like a sausage. But you have, you know, big dips at where you can obviously see like there's a break section or whatever. It's not like still crushed in that section too. You want to have actual, you know, dips in your different sections. And what I do to like kind of work around that is like, you know, either mix individual like section by section, like how should everything sit here? Because that's one of the things I had to do with like the sub in a lot of different spots. I ended up adding like a ton of other like filter effects and other shit like that. You know, just for the sub though. And then at certain spots, and I think I did this in a different session for the, you know, final version of this track, I ended up using a utility for trim automation, but also used it to make everything mono right before like the drop and kind of like give everything no space. And then when everything drops, open everything up. So it sounds super wide because you actually take all the space away by doing that. Okay. So that is the lecture. So I was just talking about a couple things that we're going to be like doing right now. So automation, trim automation, and then we'll talk about these and this as well. So trim automation, this is, you know, just talking about volume automation. And it's using a second fader source. So that is literally just a utility. So if you're going to go and automate the volume on your individual tracks, you should be doing it like that. So that allows you to just have this fader like this. So if you just generally needed to move this volume down, you can just do it like that. So it doesn't lock your fader. So that's a huge thing because of things like latch and touch mode, automation writing, where it's going to allow you to like move the thing around, but when you go and reset all your automation, it moves it right back to where it accidentally made a point. So you just kind of want to like be aware of that. You know, because like I've done that before, you know, and then all of a sudden like I made a bunch of volume changes that end up getting reset. Like, what's going on? So yeah, just keep that in mind. You can also do it with individual clip volume as well. So like this is one of the biggest things I ended up having to like rebalance because the processing of this track is really just overdoing it at every stage in the game. But knowing how like 64, you know, float works, that means that it's not clipping technically. So, you know, if I was to flatten this, this is like one of the things I did for the track. So just flatten it here. So you look at the waveform and it's just totally sausaged out. So now if I just go and open up all the clips like that by highlighting them, pull down the volume. I can find where the transient really is. So I can reduce it and then kind of remix it from here. What I wanted though was the was the like maximized version of the sound. So, you know, being able to have this now, because this is how 64-bit float works in theory. You know, so just knowing that, you know, you can go and just try this and then find your transients again. So 64-bit float is the summing engine for Ableton. So it's not unique to what I'm doing, it's unique to the program itself. So it's also related to 64-bit, you know, actual program a bit. You know, it allows for the capability of like using all the RAM. That's pretty much what 64-bit is talking about in that sense. But floating point math is what this is talking about. So floating point math allows you to have a floating headroom. It allows you to get pretty much plus 12 above 0. But, you know, with 64-bit float, technically you can go above that. And so I'm actually reducing, you know, -18 here, and I'm still seeing more transient. So just to hear it before I do that, you know, there's not much change that should happen, you know, because there's no processing like actually on this bus here. There's a filter that has some automation, and then there is sidechains, and then one Pro L just to make sure it's not clipping. And then it allows me to use my bus volume as just kind of like a handle for where the volume of this main bass is. Okay, so, you know, listening to it before and after, you know, I just kind of changed the volumes there. That's all that's happening. So that's kind of all I want to like set up before I go and set up this final mix on this sound. Because this sound actually needs some more work in terms of its like mid-range as well. Because this is like pretty much the main thing in the mix. So definitely can't be in the way, in the wrong ways, like which is like too much high end or whatever else, not having enough low end. You know, and I actually have like a ton of processing on before this, you know, so what this means for this is the final performance of this sound, you know, so then I can go and do my final, you know, new mix change here. I'll just call this 2. And then, you know, be able to go back in time to where the synth was live as well. But I usually like to get all my synths out of, you know, synth world and printed, usually. Sub, you know, depends. But for like leads, other synth sounds, yeah, I definitely like to have everything that I've done for the production, like automation wise, just kind of finalized, and I don't want to like think about touching it again. And then if I want to go and do that, then I can go back, or I can import that track into the session and then just kind of work it like that and then reprint it. Okay. So we got a couple different spots here as well. So let's actually freeze this. especially with like creating space in your mix, like for different spots, like a build-up. Pretty essential that you start like creating automation for all your different effects to kind of like move stuff out of the way, as opposed to just doing something to the track itself. You know, just being like, this should make it work for every single section. It's like, that's just not going to be how it works. Let me undo this actually. Yeah, I do have the side chains on here. So I want to take those off first. So I want to get the sidechain on the final version of this. So this just has pretty much what we did last time, which was use some saturation and some expansion in order to kind of like blow up the sub. So it's going to finalize that here. Because the sub is pretty cool for a lot of the intro spots, but it's really, really loud. And I ended up having to move it out of the way a bunch of times. And then also just using like momentary like high pass filters or whatever on like distorted settings, just like adding in some new harmonics to the sub itself kind of really helps. Actually flatten all this. This one's super loud too, because this is actually the bass sound just repurposed into this lead. So this is pretty much like what I'm gonna do to like start up my mix, you know, like my final mix that I'm trying to do here, which is like get everything into stems. You know, easiest way to do that, just freeze shit in Ableton. If you're doing it in Ableton. If you're doing it in another session, if you can bounce in place a track, you know, and you can do it in the same session, and you don't want to like open a new session or whatever because it's hard to like get your mind set for, you know, a new environment. Just print it alongside and start deleting stuff, and then just like take a day to do that or whatever. You know, and I definitely recommend like if you're doing album stuff and you're trying to mix your own album, you know, and you want to have your own sound with it, taking the extra time during that time to do that kind of shit and just scheduling a week where you just do that for all your tracks, like do a hardcore mix, is pretty beneficial. Okay. So we're going to listen to the mids here. We're going to rebalance these before I want to go and use a couple other things, like widening effects, because this is another thing wrong with this, is the image is a little bit skewed. And I actually rebalanced this here as well. Let's actually take these from here, because these actually weren't on. And we'll put them right here, because we're going to be using them. Okay, so I'm actually using mid-side on this, and this is why I brought it up. Because for this specific bass, I'm using mid-side. Because I'm using like a ton of different reverbs on it, and I'm also like blending a couple different like frequency ranges at the same time. And I'm trying to cross it over between my low end. So my side is being high passed. And so is my low. Or my mids. But I'm pretty much cutting a hole on the side where I want my low mids to exist in my mid channel. So the reason I'm doing this is because I want to bring in the focus of the mid-range. I want to make the mids right up the middle, because with them dispersed, not being mid-side processed before, pretty much it was like too bright. It also it didn't stand up close enough to where I was like trying to hear it. It felt still like it was too far back in the mix and I was needing to do more stuff to it. Whereas I can just fix the image and then try to kind of dial it in from there. So this is a choice I made because I'm trying to fix the image of this sound. And because it's pretty much the same, well, the same patch the whole time, and I kind of want to make it uniform, I'm going to do it to the entire track. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this and let's redo this. All right, so let's look at the spectrum here. So this is the second drop. We have a huge skew up at the top here. So let's check how that looks over in the first drop. Yeah, and that skew is kind of happening from the erosion. But I want it to be that hype, so I'm just going to have to fix it here. Okay, so when working with mid-side here in Pro Q3, just right-click and you can change its mode into mid or side. Or you can have it stereo where it affects it left and right equally. So that allows you to use your mid and side modes. So you just find another band and then you place it in the side. And now you're affecting both separately. Oh, that's cool in FL. You can have multiple arrangements. Yeah, you can flatten as many tracks as you want if they don't have certain things sidechained. Say if you're trying to flatten the kick that you're sidechaining everything to, you can't do that. But if you're flattening everything that's being sidechained by the kick, you can do that. Used to not be like that because there wasn't like a recording mode on the freeze for like a open channel to that kick, but now it actually does do that. Yeah, that's what the offline bouncing is like pretty much happening when you hit freeze. It just like bounces the entire track, just that one track, and then anything flowing into that track or whatever, it's also running that too. Okay, so pretty much what I can do here too is I can listen to each of these bands as well. So I'm doing this by holding down Command and then drag up and down. So this opens up the band so you can listen to like wideband, the whole thing, or just one small section of it. And if you just click and drag on the little headphone, then it does that. Okay, so what I'm hearing here is a little bit of a screechy element to this mid-range. So I want to reduce that. So I'm going to cut sharp right around here. You can turn down the master too. Okay, so that's fine. So I'm going to cut around here. I'm going to cut a little bit more drastic too. Do like 4 dB. Also, sometimes helps to switch the range here to 30. So if you're trying to make like, really basic cuts here that look like a lot at 12. At 30, it seems a lot less, memey. Like, yo, just kill that thing, man. So you don't really want to like subtract too much because that's like going to introduce phase problems. But 4 to 5 dB is pretty chill. So let's go make another band here, and I'm gonna high pass some of the low frequencies out on the side channel. So we're gonna go stereo placement side. Okay, and then I want to go and turn this into a low cut, and then we're gonna change the slope so it's a little bit steeper. We want none of it. So that's allowing me to hear what I'm actually cutting. So like you can hear like that's not really anything that needs to be there, so I can kind of shelve it off. Okay, so now I'm going to rebalance this high end. So I'll make it a little bit flatter here. So instead of using like, reduction like a bell curve, we're going to go and just reduce it wideband. And so this is actually in stereo mode. So I'm actually affecting both left and right side at the same time right now. So I want to go and set it to a channel if I'm going to be doing this in mid side. And I actually want to do it in the side channel. One second. All of my my mouse and keyboard just literally stopped working for no reason. It's been doing this lately. Okay, any second now, this mouse will start working. God, dude, fucking Apple, dude. Fix your shit. I just had to... I've had this happen before, so figured out that if you just plug in the keyboard, turn it off and on again, everything starts working again. Literally all the Bluetooth will just shut down. Okay, anyways. So I was trying to listen to this section before all my stuff stopped working. So this is going to be my mids. So I want this to fill in a little bit more here. So I'm going to boost it wide, and then we're going to cut. So this is going to be on our mids as well. I'm going to change this into a low cut. Hold down Command and scroll. Changes your slope. Okay, so now with this low cut here, I'm going to balance out this wideband boost I just did. So I'm going to pull this down around about 100 and give this a little bit less power so it's a little bit less muddy. And then I can add another scoop in order to take out some of the mud. Okay. And then we're going to pull down the highs again, kind of like we did on the sides. Okay, so I'm going to be a little bit more drastic with this shelf, which now allows me to kind of like hear how I want it to be on the sides for the final version of it. So I'm going to adjust the slope, and I'm doing that by just holding Command and scrolling. Okay, so I want the highs to occupy the side. And I want it to be a little bit darker in the mids. I want it to be dark and more mid heavy. So that means I can also reduce some of this mid range from the sides as well. So where it's kind of boxy or say shrill, I can kind of scoop that out a little bit. So I did also mention about EQ holes. So with mid side, it's a little bit more exaggerated because you're actually cutting space on a phase inverted version of one signal or left and right channel. So you can cut stuff from the sides and then add a little bit of it back to the mids if you want the mids to kind of shine through at that spot a little bit more. But I'm also just high passing pretty much all of the low mid range out of the sides as well. Okay, so I'm doing this with the purpose of fixing the image in a couple different stages. So I'm not just using mid-side EQ as it is just by itself. So I also have this imager here that's going to pretty much readjust my stereo image now. Because if I listen to it without the mid-side, there's a ton of space that I'm kind of losing from it. But that's actually not so much of a problem because, you know, if you've read anything about like adding a ton of reverb to your mix, it can be a problem with phase and a ton of other things. So bringing your reverb signal kind of to a center channel as well ends up really bringing everything forward, you know, whereas it would kind of feel a little bit farther back and a little bit harder to bring forward. Okay, so this is the setting I kind of like quick set it to. But pretty much what I'm doing here is I'm just bringing everything to a mono signal at the low end. So then I can really widen it out at the high spot. So with pretty much all the ozone imagers, you can just learn the curve. And one of the main reasons I like reduced the amplitude of the clip audio itself was so I can process it without it being clipped and like fully process it without it clipping into the plugin itself. Because input is definitely going to clip. So you're going to be able to clip, you know, your output and possibly, you know, your track output, but between plugins on the way into the plugin itself, there's a good chance it will distort. So let's learn the curve of this. All right. So that's pretty much where everything is, kind of settled around there, and then just bounce back and forth. So that means it's pretty much right here. Maybe can go up a little bit, but let's listen to the spots. So the way I kind of like hunt and kill my stereo image is I, you know, widen all the way, reduce all the way to mono. But ultimately, you're looking for somewhere that's not at one of those extremes. This just gives you now a handle of where this section of your frequency range is in the stereo field. So generally, you want your highs to be the widest. So they are all the way wide. or something mono would be just the line up the middle. So this is actually not doing anything to alter the signal yet. This is kind of generally modulating the stereo image. So it can like reduce to mono here, but it's not stereoizing. So the stereoizer is pretty much a delay. And it's a smart delay, so it's not, you know, going to sound too delay-like, but, you know, different versions of Ozone's imager have sounded like really, really tinny and like metallic. Generally not something you want to do on a master either. All right, so our mid-range is kind of bouncing left and right here. So I want to bring this up the center here. Just kind of put a cage on that. And this should be like this. I shouldn't really hear much of anything or see anything. But it's getting a little bit of bleed. I guess I could high pass that out, but it's not really going to influence the mix that much. So you can use the different modes to kind of like check out where it is. Lucid Jew's nice because it gives you a easier like left-right relationship, whereas like the polar view can kind of be a little bit confusing, especially when things sum together. And then the polar level is actually really cool because it redraws. So you can see where your sections are kind of lined up here. So I can like place it in the stereo field, kind of like this, reorient it. So I do want this to be pretty wide though, and I'm going to give it a little bit extra. I'm actually going to open up the mids a little bit as well, and then keep the low mids pretty centered. All right, so at the end of the day, if you're to be listening to this bass in a mono environment, now it's always going to be pretty much in phase with itself because it was already set up to be like that. If you're listening in headphones, like I am right now, definitely a huge difference here between like the stereo field when you go into mid-side. So if you're trying to wrangle in the stereo field, especially if you're using like a ton of reverb throws on a sound, this brings all of them up to the front. So this is kind of like a quick effect, I guess, in order to like wrangle all of your reverb in kind of all at once, because all the reverb for this individual sound has been printed into it. So now, say if I wanted to add that back. So I have automation where I can turn a device on and off. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to turn off my mid-side EQ for my intro. So I'm going to get all the stereo fill back. And then here, this is where I'll bring it in. You can bring it back there. And then this is really good to have it all the way up the center right as it's dropping. So then, everything else is going to get wider than the bass here. The bass shouldn't be wider than the mix, really, because it's going to muddy itself up. Okay. So after you do like your effect stuff, if you want to go and process it, you know, it's like just do one final kind of like code of EQ on here. I'll just do it after all the processing. And because this is like one sound for everything, I usually run it, you know, at some point during the process here, just turn it into a linear phase. I'm just going to duplicate that. Enable to any command delete all automation for a parameter. And then we're going to default setting this. Okay, so now we can go and change this into linear phase to make sure that, you know, all the movement here doesn't really get fucked up by this EQ, smearing out at any point. Okay, so we want to just go and do one final move here as well. Go up to 30 so I can be a little bit more drastic. So you can highlight multiple bands here and then hold command, adjust all their cues. That's what I'm doing right here. You can adjust their volumes. So this is what I do when I'm listening to it and adjusting at the same time. So then I can just kind of adjust the relationship between these two bands as well. Okay, so this midsection here, scooping it out, really takes it out of the center. So I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit, and I'm going to subtract a little bit of the mud. And I'm saying this mud here because whenever I think about when I'm EQing stuff, you know, just to reference this chart again, when I'm thinking about a sound from where it is, you know, fundamentally, from its fundamental, I kind of shift this whole scale up. So if, you know, the low end of the sound is around 500, then say the boxy mid-range muddy part would be around 800. So you just kind of like shift it up. They always kind of mean the same thing because you're talking about a whole range of the spectrum. But in terms of just like voicing what part, even to yourself, what part you want to go and like kind of scoop out. Because like if something sounds too honky, just like it said before, it's usually around here. But if the meat of the sound is also around here, then I want something to kind of bevel that out so I have more of a general curve that gives me more power up at like 900 hertz, which I want more of, and then a little bit less of this really high peak, which is around 500. Sweet. Okay, so that sounds better because it's not as shrill up in the high end here. I'm not doing too much to it, but you know, just seeing the actual spectrum here, seeing that it's going all the way up, just skewing up. can easily just subtract it like that. So we can just easily just make a shelf EQ and then just subtract like that and then just see it go down in real time. And that's the easiest way to go and like reduce certain things that you want to be flat, because that's the ultimate goal I'm going for here. I'm not reducing things, you know, with like the confines of a certain amount of dB. I'm looking at the actual spectrum here and I'm trying to achieve a more flat version of it. And the more it becomes like that, the more it's going to pop through the mix. So the next version of that, though, is multi-band compression. And you can do that a couple different ways. We can use the OTT, but let's use Ozone here, because this is how I mix. Like, I'll use OTT a lot during the process, but I kind of keep it out of like higher quality chains, because I just have had experience with it in the past fucking up and just doing weird fade stuff. But lately it's been pretty chill. But I just really like using the more high-end stuff. So yeah, let's get alloy. I sometimes use alloy on this. You can also use trash. Trash will also allow us to compress multiband. Get some ozone though. Let's just use the ozone. So we want to use the dynamix. So pretty much what I'm doing like progressively is fixing different pieces of this sound. You know, I'm rebalancing the mid-range so it's a little bit more present and allows like, you know, different parts of like the drums and the sub to kind of pop through that I already did for like the foundation of it. But because I did that, I have a reference point for where it needs to fit. So if like it's sitting outside the mix and it's like taking away from the wideness of the top loops and a bunch of other like effect sounds, then I want to bring the image of that main bass in and then just throw it when I need to. So turning off this Pro Q and zero latency is pretty chill here. Turning on and off a linear phase EQ is not super chill. It usually fucks up. Okay, so let's do the same thing we did here. Okay. Looks like it's right around here. Oh, it's still learning. I was like, why isn't it letting me grab it? All right, so that's chill. I'm going to keep it right in between these two spots it was bouncing in between. So that's kind of what it was telling me. It was like starting here and it was just like always going all the way up here, which then gives us this huge mid-range section, which is pretty chill. But I know the low end is kind of around here, so we're going to shift this up. And then we're going to go, we can reduce this band or we just keep it there. But we might just reduce it. Okay, so first thing you want to do whenever you just put anything through a compressor is make sure the thresholds aren't already compressing it. So you want to just bring those up. All right, so the low mid range is right around here, and I can see that by that. Okay, so what would I want more from this section here? So it feels pretty far back. It is part of the mid range that was skewing upwards, and then I kind of fixed that. But I still want to get part of this transient, because when I go and solo it, I can see a lot of like movement between, you know, the highest peak and here, whereas in the mid-range section it's all like sustain, which is definitely what I want, but I want a little bit more attack from this higher mid-range here. I'm going to reduce it a little bit. Try expanding it as well by pulling it down like this. If you do that though, pull down the gain as opposed to other way, and then faster attack so it just kind of fires quicker. So I want to just give a little bit more general power to this area. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. All right, then we got our highs here, and this is kind of fine-tune the taste. But what I like to do with the highs, since especially on this really, really bright sound, has a lot of highs all the time, you can go about it two different ways. You can just, shelve it off and do nothing with it, and then just use this as just kind of a gain. Pretty much an EQ at that point. Or you can go in kind of like a parallel compression curve where you're giving it more sustain by crushing it, bringing down the ratio to something that's not like limiting over 10, but like 6 to 7 here, and then have the attack be quick and the release a little bit long. So this is going to reduce by about 5-6 dB, and then I can add that back. And then this midsection is super crunchy. So we're going to get it just a little bit more under control here. And when you're doing stuff with a lot of sustain, doing really drastic attack, like really quick, is always going to make the compressor fire rapidly as it passes through it. So it's immediately going to crush it. So if you want to just kind of like add sustain to a bass sound, and this kind of like can be applied to like a electric bass as well. But yeah, you just want to get the general power here and then control the sustain if it's not super transient based. Okay, so I'm controlling the sustain here by reducing it about 4 or 5 dB. I'm gonna have it be quick in the release though. I don't want to crush it for too long. Then you can make the knee a little bit sharper so it fires a little bit more rapidly. So I'm gonna push this up as well. Okay, so now that I've like rearranged this, now it's giving me a new volume for it to set at. So generally, my rules with my sections of, stems or buses, whatever, kind of set this up last time as well, where you have all the buses here. So like drum section, you kind of want the transients to be around -6 to -3. Tops, about 3 to 4 dB below that. And then sub, I will keep it around -12, -11, usually. And then my main bass around about -7 to -9, depending how close I want it to be. Yeah, transient master is also another good option for doing that stuff. Like if you're using Alloy or Neutron, like Alloy 2 is something I use a lot, even though I think it's discontinued Works exactly like Neutron though. You can just go and set up a multi-band transient designer. Kind of same way you would do if I'm going to do any transient designing though, I usually do it early on in the chain because I want everything else to kind of like blow up the transient. Yeah. So sometimes it'll work. Not really here. It's not really adding anything to it because I can't really get more transient where there is kind of a blurred transient. But, you know, giving it more general power kind of like allows it to crunch through the mix. Okay, so we're also going to add a couple more spots of automation. I just right-clicked and showed all automated lanes. All right, so this is what I do all the time when I'm using mid-side because I don't want it on all the time. And I've learned that because it just doesn't sound good on all the time. So you want to go and make sure that you add back the space for spots that need to have the space. So it's not always straight up the center. That's part of like the snapshot automation stuff where this is literally just a part of the mixing that's being automated here. It's not like I'm doing some kind of crazy effect. I'm just turning off one EQ. But that one EQ changes the entire stereo relationship. So I definitely want it though for the drop because without it, it doesn't have the same closeness that I want. Keep it wide there too. So it's pretty obvious where, you know, the reverb is. Cool. This is definitely a spot I edited a lot. Okay, and then I think right here too, and then we'll actually do this too. This is the outro loop. Cool. Then we have the tape stop on the master here. Also, I'm also running everything through this submaster here. And the way I did that was, you know, have everything in the, you know, bus setup or groups, whatever, however you're sending everything to it, and then just send all that to this one track, submaster instead of master, and then set that track to in. And it just becomes a bus. So if I was to add any other like processing or whatever, or I just want to see this handle here, this gives me 2 spots for my master metering. So I usually like that. I like to have a master in my session. Kind of becomes annoying having to open this up and do any automation to the entire mix. Say if I was going to do a filter movement or any type of effect, it becomes a little bit harder to kind of like open up that menu. So I just tend to work outside of that. But it's also the way I've worked prior as well. So having it stuck here is kind of a new thing for Ableton. Because in Pro Tools, you would have to make a submaster, a master, all that stuff. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring this whole mix into mono. So we're going to bring it to mono at this spot right here. We're going to bring it back to 100%, the spots it needs to be. So I want it to sound really, really narrow and then wide. Let's move it down here as well. Just trying to block that out. Cool, that's fine. Definitely a stylistic choice. But for EDM, you know, this is something that's super common. You want to bring stuff back to mono, add your buildups to make your drop feel wider. Cool. All right, so yeah, just want to make this narrower, less wide. Yeah, and you can do this for whatever. It doesn't have to be on the fills, doesn't have to be on anything. Just anything you wanted to make narrower just for a second. You can just do it for like one fill every now and then. You could put it on the downbeat too. I've done that, where you just have the downbeat modulate into stereo. Oop, not there. I think I actually did on this track too. I deleted it, copied over nothing. So you have to be pretty deliberate with where you're putting your points here, and you want to bring it all the way back to 100%. You don't want to be deviating anywhere from that. So you want to be really, really clean with making your points. So I usually just highlight general areas first, trim them, and then curve. Okay. All right, so we have this utility on the sub as well, and then we want to do a couple other things to the frequency range. So this is going to be our like extra sub high pass filter. It's going to make it have second order harmonics. So harmonics that weren't there before. Okay, so we don't want to be too drastic with it. And we're also going to automate the volume. So whenever you do trim automation for volume, always put it at the end of your chain before you go into any effects before that. So this whole section here, we're going to bring this down by a few dB. Okay, so I bring it up and step it up over here, and then we can high pass it to move it out of the way for this last part. And you can over resonate as you modulate this up. And I'm doing this at the smallest. So my plan with these little sections right here is to final stage, get everything chopped out into the master, and then have these little sections with reverb, go and glitch them out and repeat the full-on master, and then print it like that. That's how I like to do a lot of these little like glitch effects for my finals, because it just like puts it way in front and the entire track just kind of glitches along with it, and it's really easy. Okay, so that sounds way more balanced with the main sound over here, as opposed to just being like all the way in front immediately. So also want to add the automation envelopes. Okay, and then also we want to make sure that this filter turns off for when we don't need it. So the way I usually just kind of shorten that process is by turning it off and then turning it on for the places I do need it. Make some automation here. I'm gonna put this up here. Hey, have a good night. No worries, man. Okay, so talked about a lot of stuff. You know, just with stereo imaging and with processing everything together, you know, with just like mid-side EQ and fixing the stereo image, and also talking about pretty much what all that means as well. So after that, you know, after you get your main pieces together, you can kind of start dialing everything else in. Really wish I put a vocal in this track so I can also show vocal mixing. Have to figure out a way to show you guys that. All right, so now I want to find the new balance here. We got kick snare. Our kick is pretty well heard in the mix. I like the way where it is right now. I actually want to do one thing to this kick. We're going to add some more harmonics to it. So let's add the exciter. So diodes or the triodes, these are going to be the solid state. You got tubes as well. Tube is a little bit more drastic. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. So I want some tube saturation, the higher mid-range, because I want to brighten it up. All right, so it's not mega distorting because it's really, really short. So I'm going to hear that with the whole mix now and then dial this mix in. All right, cool. Yeah, I like where it is. I think the snare still needs to come down a little bit. Cool. All right, and now let's do the tops. So what's cool about this is once you figure out your main shit and then find like where everything needs to fit like mix-wise, should be pretty easy. The next steps, you're just like, all right, now I'm going to do this spot, and you just kind of like make everything kind of fit in with the template that you're just setting up for yourself, which is like, make sure everything you just dialed in stays that way. Everything that now is not so audible, figure out a way to fit it into your new balance. So I'm losing the tops here, which is totally fine because I'm not doing anything to them yet. Which is literally just EQ. So let's go and do a little bit of processing here. So we got the imager. Let's bring everything back to 0. And then we got transient master. And I was using this just as a general transient designer, but let's actually use Alloy for this, because the multiband transient designer is actually super good for this. All right, so we got, really sizzly highs, and they also have a really, really percussive transient. So it's going to clip this a little bit when I push it. I'm going to turn on the limiter here. Okay, so this is kind of what I want right here. I want this mid-range section. So I'm going to find that. So that is the little transient that's going to cut through the entire mix. And then everything else should kind of sustain around it. Cool. All right, so now I want to make that sizzle just a little bit more. So we're going to add some more harmonics into it. I'm going to do that post what I just did. So I'm going to add a little bit of probably triode. So what's really cool on this, because these are like tube emulations, when they get hits like struck by a transient, they actually add a ton of harmonics. So I'm getting low end from this as well, which means I need to EQ it again. Let's get the Pro Q3, put it at the end of this chain so we now can see where our new balance is. You can listen to it with all of the processing. Cool. All right, so this is also on the entire group, so I'm bus processing this. Yeah, so I definitely want this on the entire group. But what I like to do with like bus processing like this is also do a parallel smash processing just to get some general sustain from the sound. Squash it like that. So I'm going to add this saturator here because I want to get some more harmonics where we're going to wideband saturate. All right, so now we're getting the full range here, and that's what I wanted. So I want to get all these harmonics here, there, because they weren't there before, they didn't exist. Okay, so that sounds cool. We're going to pull this back. Really what makes it pop out more, or what pops out more, are these like little fills here, like the transients on these snares. These also need to pop out just a little bit more. So I'm going to push them into the processing a little bit more as well. So another thing I also do, so now that I have everything in audio here, I can just kind of like batch cut things. You know, say if I want this snare to be the only thing in the mix here, I can just kind of do that. Okay, so we don't want it out for the entire thing. We just want it to move out of the way for a couple spots. So I'm also designing the transients like this manually. So I want to cut it out all the way. What I might do is I might automate the compressor here just a little bit harder as well. Little cuts like this, just to bring in this top loop, make a ton of space in the mix. This is something I had to do when I would like mix metal stuff, especially to like make left and right effects happen. You'd have to chop everything out of mix and just like isolate it. Yeah, so it becomes like a pain in the ass if you have to automate a ton of shit on and off, and you know, to really get things silent. So getting it in audio kind of just makes it happen. All right, so we got a new balance going on here. Just like all the highs of the tops are popping through now. The mid-range of the main bass is more centered. It's kind of like what I was trying to go for. And then all of our different sections too, we have like the balance between the stereo field of the main element here. So say if you were like doing like a ton of different basses, like you had a bunch of different patches and shit. Put them all into one group and then print that single group and then process all of those after fixing how all of them fit in the mix individually. So then you can get everything to uniformly fit the entire track. So like with this and different tracks, like I'll take one bass and then I'll duplicate it, make the second drop out of that. With this one, like I was saying in the last class, I just achieved every single sound from one patch. So that was made this whole process a lot easier. You know, but this is not always the case. You don't always just have one track to work with here. But in the case of not this, it's still this because I'm still sending all the different basses that I could potentially use into one bus. And that would be my bus here. And then I print that bus, bring it into my final mix. Or print each individual track and then put them into one bus and then finish it like that. But either way, your bass section is always one track. Doesn't matter how many tracks of synth basses you have. It should always be one track at the end of your mix. Everything should be running to its own bus, which is a group here, into your submaster. Easiest way to mix and to get uniform mixes across the board is to have like everything finalized to these final pieces. Like summed together, you know, to smaller outputs. You know, you don't want to be summing 100 tracks into one. You know, you can definitely do that. You can have a ton of different groups and all that shit as well. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you are definitely doing that, but having them run individually really creates a mess in the mix. So say if I wanted to take out all the leads or I want to take out all of something, you know, it's the easiest way to do it because the top loops here are probably the most other, you know, shit that's going on. You know, I have a bunch of different cuts here for each individual part. So having them all in one section that allows me to control the dynamic range of all the top loops for every section after I kind of bring them up to where they need to be, take out stuff that doesn't need to be there. Then it's pretty much easy from there. It's pretty much easy to get this one top loop section here, shave off the shit that you don't want from any of these loops at all. Fix the image of all the loops. Sometimes I'll go and put a utility before an imager on the top loop specifically, and then make it mono, and then create a new image from that mono image. Do I have an album release date yet? No, not yet. So, you know, just different ways to think about it, especially with like more complex top loops. Like every single shaker sample I have has got some stereo shit going on. So I usually like to sum those to mono first and then create a new stereo image via imager or a delay, which imager is also a delay. So through delays, chorusing effects. When do you mix everything to peak at -6? Pretty much after this point. So what I've gotten into right here is like final volume kind of section